All righty. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon to our New Zealanders who are with us today as well. My name's Himal, and I'm glad to have Nathan Wallis again with us. And today we're exploring play, connection, and culture. And we were just having a great conversation just before we got on the call about, what the intention of today's session is. And before we get into that, though, let me start with an acknowledgement of country. So we want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we work and live on, honouring their elders past, present, and emerging. We respect the deep connections that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have with country and commit to learning from their wisdom as we build a shared future. And also to all of our First Nations people from across the world, not just Australia, we also want to pay our respects to you as well. So just a little bit of an introduction to us. We're Mana, and at Mana, we're committed that every child has an extraordinary start to life. We just had one of our most incredible product launches last week, where we really pushed forward how our child development platform will support teachers, educators, and early childhood services across the world. And we released some incredible features and products that just haven't been seen before in the sector. So if you're interested in seeing that, we have a webinar that you can access on that as well, where we go through all of those. But as part of our commitment that every child has an extraordinary start to life, we also partner with some of the greatest minds in our sector, like Nathan, to bring forward the conversation of what early childhood education and what the early years should be, to help us empower all of us with the narrative of, everyone on this call understands that early childhood is the most important time in a human being's life, these first 5 to 7 years. So it's really empowering us with the knowledge, skills, and tools to be able to communicate that and help the rest of the world understand the importance of the work that we do. So without further ado, we have Nathan joining us today. Hey again, Nathan. And just one thing also before we kick off, I'm sure there are going to be many questions as we go throughout today. Today's going to be a really interesting conversation as we explore play, connection, and culture, and really that operative inquiry of how do we actually shape the young human beings to be lifelong learners, and what does the evidence say, and how do we have conversations around more instructional teaching versus play-based learning. And this is a really challenging topic for a lot of us. And Nathan, we get to talk with hundreds and hundreds of organizations, and even though we're kind of 15 years into like the formal play-based, we're in the play-based era for early childhood education. We've been here for 15 years. A lot of leaders in our sector are still struggling with that idea, And so maybe we'll just kick off with just maybe starting at the high level, Nathan, about play and dispositions and what human beings actually get out of the early year, what we learn, what is it that we're left with that really has an impact for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, because that's really at the heart of it, isn't it? What's gonna impact the kids for the rest of their life? I mean, it's a big topic. We've sort of come full circle in lots of ways. Like play has been traditionally valued. I should say what I was trying to do today was that I know as a teacher, you get parents that want to do literacy and numeracy. They want to, they can't understand the value of play, and then you've got to try and explain it to them why you're not sitting them down at a desk getting them ready for primary school, and why you're doing this play thing. So that's what I've set out. I've got a mind map in front of me, and I think by the end of this, hopefully, you'll be able to sort of explain what play is, relate it to the field of theory and research, and the history of education, and help to move parents forward. But anyway, this is the information I think you need to do that. I don't think you'll be able to go over all of this in one shot with the parents. Some of this is just to inform you, so you know more than what you're telling the parents. But that's my basic plan for the day, right? I mean, when I was a teacher, I obviously valued play like other people, but I wasn't, fully research informed when I was a teacher. It was you were just too busy doing the job. And when I got to teachers college and had to lecture and this stuff, when I said about research, and I assumed that there'd be, 50% of the research said do play, and 50% of the research said, no, get in and do early literacy and numeracy. So I was staggered to find out that then there was no evidence to say to do literacy and numeracy. But 100% just come from sort of top down. There's no evidence. And again, we've moved through time. Again and again, it's just to do with our culture. It's to do with the fact that, one, early childhood is not seen as very valued. So primary school is more important than early childhood, secondary school is more important than. So they think for the longest time that it's just genes. You're just changing shitty nappies and blowing noses. So they don't have that, with the 1990s, we know that more development happens in that period of time than in any other period of development. But traditionally, we thought it was shitty nappies, blowing noses, getting them ready for learning when they get to school. So we also have a core belief in our society that the earlier you do things, the better off you are. So these have to be addressed, because that's why we do literacy and numeracy. Because if we get, whenever a new government comes in and they're concerned with the rates of literacy for 15-year-olds, they go, oh, right, what we should do is start literacy even earlier. They don't necessarily consult early childhood teachers. They don't even consult the research and the literature around what's happening at those stages. They literally just think that, well, if you've got a problem then, instead of starting at 7, why don't we start at 5 and that will eliminate the problem? They don't understand that a 5-year-old has different developmental needs than a 7-year-old. Most people, if they've never studied human development, tend to think of, the frontal cortex as where intelligence is. That's 7+ behaviors. They don't think playing and imaginary friends and creativity and stuff is as much about intelligence. So they just go straight to that 7-year-old stuff and think the earlier you start with 7-year-old stuff, the better off you'll be. Now, be really clear, if it really did produce intelligent, resilient adults to sit them down and just teach them primary school stuff right from the start, that's what we'd do. But we got a body of research and evolution and culture. Like every culture has come up with play. We know that directly, the more hours you spend in play as a mammal, the higher your IQ will be. I'm just trying to say it's not just in early childhood we value play. Cultures across time have valued play. I'll go into the other history, but
I mean, I can attest to that myself. I grew up with an early childhood mum who was an early childhood teacher, and I have a very high IQ. So I'm just joking. But
there you go.
But just sorry, Nathan.
No, I just wanted them to be able to relate that to the theory base. Like nowadays, we would talk about like Bruce Perry, cognitive neuroscientist, Dan Siegel. There's lots of neuroscientists that explain how the brain works. And we've talked about that before, and about the frontal cortex is actually on the limbic system. But they are building on previous researchers who didn't have brain scans. So if you look at the history of education in the Western world, it's mainly based on Piaget. Have we talked about Piaget before? Because he's your basic theoretical, every early childhood teacher has to know Piaget, because that's the standard theorist that you get taught. Our whole Western education system is based on Piaget's stages of cognitive development. And I can't remember all the stages, but he said you reach the concrete operational stage when you reach 7 years old. And so that's basically, it was his work, supported by others, but it was his work saying that said school should start at 6. So you've been at school for 1 year and got used to being away from your mother and got used to the sort of social, emotional aspects in a year. And then when you were 7 and ready to formally learn, then you'd already been at school for a year. He could see, and like I say, he didn't have brain scans, but he could see, observing children from the outside, that they think differently. And it changes around about that between 7 and 8, what he called the concrete operational. So he's just observing children hundreds of years ago, but he could see that before that, they didn't have some sort of cognitive prerequisites that you need for literacy and numeracy. Like one of them is symbolic thinking. So we sort of take it for granted we've got symbolic thinking. But under 7, you don't necessarily have symbolic thinking. Symbolic thinking is, a symbol could be when you see the rubber ducky in the bath and it's got a bright orange beak and it's bright yellow. That's not really what a duck looks like, right? So that's a symbol for a duck. If you see that, you know it's a symbol for a duck. If you say to the kid, the 1-year-old in the bath, oh, look, there's a duck, when you're pointing at this yellow thing with an orange beak, and then you go and feed the ducks at the park and say, there's a duck, that's confusing to a child sort of under 3 because they don't have symbolic thinking. And so you label them both ducks. Symbolic thinking is you need for literacy because you need to know this is a symbol for tea. That's makes the t sound. So there's whole lots of cognitive stages like that. Symbolic thinking is just one of them that he noticed don't generally turn up until about 7 and a bit. So it's a waste of time trying to teach literacy and numeracy before that, because you need these prerequisites. Yeah,
So,
I mean, there's obviously developmental differences, as we talked about before. Firstborn girls are often doing it at 4. Boys who aren't the firstborn aren't doing it until 7.5. But he just went on the average. It was like, if you wait until they're 7, and remember, they still do this in Scandinavian countries. It's still based on Piaget's system. If you wait until they're 7 and introduce literacy and numeracy, then they learn it really quickly. And so it's just a stress before that. And when you do it early, I want to emphasize that when you do it early, whether you learn to read at 4 or whether you learn to read at 7, after the age of 8, nobody can tell for the rest of your life. So, and I've covered a few bits there. What I'm trying to build up is that understanding of the theoretical base, that what you're informed by research. And you can go right back to Piaget stages of cognitive development. You can move it through. I mean, my journey with theorists, you go to the university and study human development, and you get introduced to Freud and Jung. You familiar with Jung, Himal?
yeah, I remember reading an allegory of Jung.
Right.
I forgot what the book was called, but it was great. It was a long time ago.
I love you, but I don't think early childhood teachers just necessarily have to know that in detail. It's just that to have academic standing with the parents and to demonstrate an understanding, you can demonstrate how play fits within the whole theory of human development. So with Piaget, stages of cognitive development within his theory, you shouldn't bother doing it until you're 7. Jung talked about play as being in the right brain. So he was maybe early on too, but he said that you should go out for 20 minutes a day and play to activate the right brain, that's where creativity, innovation, inventions come from. And that geniuses and the inventors and stuff, they often come up with the things in dreams. And I don't want to go too far into Jung, but he just related it all to left and right brain. And if you're going to be a genius, the left brain might be where all the schoolwork is, and accountants are on the left brain. But if you're going to have creative genius and innovation and all those, higher aspects of learning, you need the right brain. And you're not going to have that unless you exercise it. So Jung said, go outside and exercise it 20 minutes a day. Play should be non-purposeful, undirected, just go with the flow. If you don't know how to play, he said, go back to when you were a kid because you knew how to play then. So he used to play damming the creeks all the time, with rocks, damming creeks. So he would go out for 20 minutes a day and dam the creek. And he reckoned that a lot of his genius was as a result of that, because he exercised his right brain. So we can relate it to Piaget stages of cognitive development. We can relate it to Jung, even in some early childhood. People in the audience will know people like Montessori, Steiner. Those theorists got a particular style of delivering, and it's based on their understanding of human development. And all of those people use play. So, yeah. I mean, that's probably enough for them to embed it in,
Well,
I mean, they'll have their own theorists. So I really like, I was really influenced by Dr. Emmy Pickler, and Magda Gerber. You heard of them?
Magda
Magda
Gerber was one of the theorists behind Rye, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And Emmy Pickler was the doctor at the Hungarian orphanage that took over and had all these amazing. But the reason I like her is because she shifts the paradigm around. She has a big cultural shift, and children are treated with ultimate respect. And she had that principle of relationship is all, and you don't put a baby in a position that they can't get into naturally. If people are interested in that, they can follow through on that stuff. I think it's good for the teacher to be able to have this conversation with the parents and to demonstrate that you can, as we talk about play, you can embed it within that whole body of knowledge and understanding of where we've come from. And play is being valued. I think play is the method that humans have evolved to facilitate the development of higher intelligence. And so most cultures have done it, and including us, until relatively recently. There are examples of cultures that have tried to eliminate play and to follow the STEM subjects, to ignore all the research and go, no, we're just going to get these bloody brainy kids brainier quicker. And what happens in a nutshell is you can accelerate their reading and accelerate their academic skills, but you compromise those dispositions we're going to talk about in the limbic system. So you get kids who get 95% on the exam and reproduce the answer, but they've got very limited creativity, innovation. You produce like a robotic accountant who can get high on the exam, but can't do any leadership stuff. It doesn't get any of that right brain creativity, innovation, the stuff that you really need to activate your intelligence. There's very little use having a PhD in something if you've got social anxiety and can't leave the house. You need the other stuff. I think I talked about China was an example of a nation that people know about that sort of got rid of play and got the kids to all be competing for tests and stuff. And I don't want to be dissing China. I love China, but they've changed their mind on that and come full circle. They've now made it that legally you're supposed to do play until to the age of 7. Actually, they just recently in China said that you're only allowed to do one after school, before school activity. They used to do
Wow.
before school, after school, evening, because they're trying to radically change the culture to get the kids bored, to instigate more play.
Mm,
They're exposed to the same research that we are, and they can see that just focusing on literacy and numeracy and academic stuff early on creates black and white thinking. It destroys creativity. That black and white thinking is a precursor to anxiety and depression. Yeah. So anyway.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, hey, Nathan, it might be worthwhile just recapping this, because I think for our teachers in the audience and readers in the audience, we probably, maybe if we could just focus on 2 areas to empower them. One is, what is the evidence? And maybe let's just start with like formal instruction and reading as an example. But what is some of the evidence that shows that focusing on formal reading and instruction early on is detrimental, or sorry, is not beneficial or potentially detrimental? Then on the flip side, maybe what is some of the evidence that shows that focusing on play is extremely beneficial? One thing comes to mind is like, we were talking about this earlier, the PISA study that was done, but I'll leave that to you maybe to run through.
Say that last bit again, sorry.
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind was the PISA study, the ongoing PISA study, which is which has showed that essentially when a child learns to read earlier versus later, by the age of 7 or 8, there's no lasting advantage to that kind of focus. But on the flip side of that, if we focus too much on skills early on, we can actually have a negative impact on motivation, which changes, their ability to actually learn and engage in things outside of formal instruction. So, keen to kind of maybe dive into those 2 pieces.
Yep. I mean, that's the thing. If we do literacy and numeracy early, we tend to sacrifice the very dispositions that the rest of us are advocating as what we're supposed to be doing at that time. So if you've got to have one of the dispositions going to set you up to be a lifetime learner is to take ownership of your learning and to have autonomy and drive in your learning. Now, if your learning journey starts with please the teacher and tell them what the right answer is, that's not autonomy in your own learning. That's trying to please the teacher. If I set up for individual instruction and I put myself up the front as the teacher, the knower, you're the not knower because you don't know, I'm the knower, and I'm going to give you the information. So I'm going to hand that down to you. I'm in charge. Your learning is to listen to me and to repeat what I have said is the right answer. So that's the exact opposite thing that you want from play. Whereas at that foundational stage of learning, that doesn't really matter how much the alphabet they know. What matters is that they have those dispositions like, I'm a learner, I'm a good learner. If you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right. And this is the age when children sort that stuff out. And they, again, relating it to theorists and stuff, everyone knows Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You've got the fundamental needs, trust versus mistrust when you're young. I mean, they're psychological, not neurological, but it's a similar thing. Like you're working out stuff like, am I in charge of my learning? Am I competent? Am I good enough? Am I more than I thought I was? Do I have good ideas? Can I discover things like, and if we go to primary school mode, because I remember I was a primary school teacher first, so I was a lovely primary school teacher, but you're in charge as a primary school teacher. You're telling them what to learn, and you're doing it in a fun, really cool way. But and that's fine if they're over 7, because you're not destroying those foundational dispositions that are going to set them up to be lifetime learners. We might get a 7-year-old that can read and count to 100 and stuff, but like you said in that study that you quoted, I mean, that's just saying the same information that we've always seen. It says cognitive results plateau at 8. That's how you can summarize that whole field. Cognitive results plateau at 8. Any advantages you get from starting early literacy and numeracy disappear by the age of 8. But what you do have left is these kids that lack creativity and have black and white thinking and just want to please the teacher The stuff that comes from play. I think we talked about before, like how long you focus your attention for. There's a basic fundamental one. I should back up and say dispositions. Basically, it's an emotional term because you're dealing with the limbic emotional brain. And a disposition is basically how you feel about something. So we're talking about how you feel about learning. So learning, literacy, and numeracy is going to be up in the frontal cortex, but the base of that, the foundation, is the limbic system, and that's your feeling brain. So between sort of 2 and 7, you're really working out your feelings about learning. Am I scared of learning because I'm going to look dumb to people? I'm going to get it wrong. People are going to get angry or disappointed. Is it going to be too hard for me and everyone else is going to be successful and I'm not going to? You understanding that? Those fundamental things are what's being laid down. And when you do free play, you teach the child like they're in charge, like they're competent. That key term, the competent. The old traditional system sort of teaches you that you're not competent. The teacher's the competent one. They've got all the answers. They're going to give you the answers. An early childhood approach is going, if you're the child I'm working with, you're like a little scientist that's discovering your world. And I'm here as your chief, advisor, an administrator. It's not a power role like it is in primary and secondary. I'm not the knower. And in fact, if I get the kids in early childhood to think I'm the knower, that means they're the not knowers. I fundamentally failed what I need to do in early childhood because I need them to know they're a knower. I need to follow their process and reinforce their process. Even when I know that the answer, I know the outcome's going to be and it's not going to work. It's not about getting to the outcome. It's not about me being right. It's about them following that process and me supporting them to do that. I think that's a fundamental thing for early childhood teachers is we're not in charge of the learning. We've got all this wisdom and knowledge about social emotional development and how to help them assist them. But we're not in charge of their learning. We follow their learning. And that's a fundamental difference. And it's hard to get there. Again, culture comes in because parents find it hard to believe that you're learning anything significant by building a dam in the creek. So that's up to teachers then to really try and articulate the stuff to the parents to say, when a kid builds a dam in the creek, how long does he focus his attention for? In comparison to the kid we bring into the mat and say, right, let's get ready for primary school, let's do A's and B's. We know the answer. Kids that get brought in have what they call adult-directed early childhood education, where the teacher's in charge. They have an average concentration span of about 7 minutes. The kids in free play, where the teachers aren't in charge, and remember, free play is not doing nothing. And the teacher's got a role, but we'll go into that. But in free play, kids focus their attention. I think the average is 17 minutes. It's phenomenally more than when you interrupt them, bring them to the mat, and tell them what they've got to learn. And that's common sense, really. If you learn it that way, we've got a limited amount of time that we can take on what other people are telling us. But when you're talking to that parent and you're seeing the dam the creek, try and get the parent to understand what sort of stuff are they using. They're problem solving, they're using creativity. They persevere through failure. They have to elicit the help of others. They have to understand there's lots of maths going on as they understand, diverting the creek and stuff. It's not just the mechanics of what they're doing in the play, it's how they're treated in that play. Like they are amazing and they're discovering and it's all about how you feel in the limbic system. So a big goal in early childhood is the dispositions. They have to feel like they like learning, empowered in learning. They've got their process, and to do that, we have to leave them in charge. That's why I say free play is not really nothing. We're still going to scaffold all of that. It's actually hard because we don't get to just be in charge. So you got to learn the alphabet. We have to find out what they're learning and see how we can enrich that and how we can extend that.
I think I was just talking to my sister actually. So our family has a foster child, and he comes from a quite a traumatic background, and we were discussing the role of like language and how especially children who come from trauma, there's a very interesting limbic response, obviously, that their context creates as well, right? And how we create safety and opportunities for him to feel like he's powerful, he's capable, he's able to engage in things that and it's so interesting actually when you have an early childhood background, the frame that you bring to the early years and to a young child like Xavier versus when you may not, right? And maybe the different expectations that we have of a child.
Yeah.
Thinking of that, I'm just wondering, how, we want to empower our teachers here to have these kind of conversations, Nathan, right? And we've talked about starting with dispositions, and I think everyone here really gets why early childhood is important.
Yeah.
How might you, maybe in a more practical sense, how might you go about having that conversation to redirect a parent from going towards more like instructional forms,
Yeah. I mean, for me, when I talk to parents like that, I first of all get on board with them and congratulate them. Like there's no point in me taking a opposite view, like a debate team. Go, oh no, you're wrong. Actually, you should be doing play. I would first of all say something like, well, good on you for having a bloody opinion and just getting involved and wanting to be in there. Straight away, your kid's probably going to be fine because we can discuss all the details, but really, you see from research the big overall pattern. The parents that dump and run and don't have an opinion are the kids that struggle the most. The fact that you're in here thinking that stuff, and so good on you. And get what you mean. I was exactly the same until I studied it. I remember taking my eldest daughter to an early childhood centre, and I was going to put her in when she was 6 months old, which seemed very logical to me. Go back and finish teachers' college and stuff. And my mum said to me, "You can't put a 6-month-old baby into a childcare centre. That's child abuse." Because her generation just never had babies. And I remember, and I said to her at the time, no, they'll be looked after by trained teachers, Mum. They'll learn to read early, they'll learn all the schoolwork early, it'll make her brainy. So, I know I checked that the exact opposite, that's true. But if I show them, I'm not saying you're wrong. I love the place you're coming from. You want the best for your kids' outcomes. That's what I thought too. But guess what? The baby, it turns out when you study it, the baby's not a little 7-year-old. It's not the earlier you get, ready to be 7, the better off you're going to be. Because if that was the case, then, early childhood centres would just be starting at 7, but you've got 3 brains below that. And it's really like building a house. And you have to have those foundations in place to get all that brainy. And I would use big words to show the parents to know what I'm talking about. I'll say the executive functions. You're after the executive functions up in the frontal cortex that traditionally we understand as backing up intelligence. And you want your baby to be intelligent, so you want us to go to those executive functions. Totally understand that. But it is like building a house, and we're building the foundations for those executive functions now. It's not literacy and numeracy. Executive functions that'll make you intelligent for the rest of your life are, what are they? What are executive functions? Metacognition, understanding yourself as a learner.
Critical thinking.
Self-control.
Yeah.
Metacognition. Self-control. The ability to make yourself, control yourself, control your emotions, do the right thing, stay motivated. And I mean, I think we've gone over the executive functions before, but so there's 4 executive functions on site. But actually, between the ages of 2 and 7, we have to look at what they're doing. How are they gonna? They're going to achieve those executive functions much better in a free play environment than doing literacy and numeracy. And if we do like Scandinavian schools do and don't introduce literacy till they're 7, they catch up by 8, and there's no delay. What you've got the opportunity to do between 2 and 7, and what we're doing here, and the way as you can read in the curriculum, is really meeting the needs of that brain number 3, that creative brain that's going to form the foundation for all your learning for the rest of your life. And the best way we can do that is putting the child in charge of their own learning. And free play is, I've always pushed to parents, free play is not us standing around talking about what we did on the weekend. We're scaffolding the learning, we're extending the kids' learning. We are doing literacy and numeracy. I'd let the parents know, literacy and numeracy. I often tell the story about my grandson getting a stick and drawing in the bark and making up a symbol that was a footer, backwards question mark or something. It meant nothing, but he did that and he said, "That's his granddad." So I know for 6 years old, he's completely on track. He's using symbols. He's made up his own language. It's fine. It doesn't have to be the bloody teacher's language. He's using symbols to mean, he's using what I called it before, symbolic thinking, symbolic symbol. Yeah. So I know he's on track. So that's embedded in early childhood. And when a teacher is tracking a child, they could pick up on those things. If there really was an early need for an early intervention service, we don't need a formalized reading program to recognize that early. We can see it within their free play. Kids have used literacy and numeracy in their environments all the time. when they're reading road signs, when they're talking about speed limits, when they're seeing things written up on the wall. We have you have it available. Lots of kids want to learn to write their name. So there's a station where you can go and learn to write your name, and it's fun. But you stay there as long as you want to, because you're in charge of your own learning. The teacher's not right, you'll get to learn to write your name. Literacy and numeracy is still there, but the children are in charge of it. Because what's important under 7 is to be in charge of your learning, not to get there quickly. I think we have to break down to parents, because like when I said that stuff to my mum, I didn't see all these cultural assumptions that we have about people and teachers and like I say to people, when you get home if you're in an antenatal class and all the babies get together afterwards, there's an unspoken competition over whose baby's going to walk first. So why is that? Because then they laugh because it's true. But if we unpack that, it's because this core belief that the baby that does things earlier is cleverer. And it almost goes to, and I'm a good parent because my kid did that, early. So it's like a race. Whose baby's sleeping through the night first? Are they on solids yet? And the reading at 4 is just an extension of that. It's a culturally based belief. Basically, teachers should know that it's a little bit based on science. Savants, really super brainy, super duper brainy kids, their cortex thickens really early, so they do things early. Even those up writing symphonies and bloody Einstein doing amazing stuff, but they did. Their cortex did thicken early and prematurely. They were savants and geniuses, but they paid a price for that. How do I say it nicely? Their social skills were, Einstein was weird. Einstein would do things like an autistic person would. He was very wealthy towards the end, but he had to have a minder with him all the time because he would walk out in the middle of roads and stuff. He had a habit of picking up cigarette butts everywhere he went and emptying out the spare cigarette, the tobacco, so he could smoke it in his pipe because he didn't want to pay for it. Then they made millions of dollars. He had lots of little weird habits like that. So you pay a price for going into that extreme intellect. And, and your kid's probably not going to be a savant. And you don't necessarily want them to be a savant. Those kids that got the highest IQ scores and stuff, I don't know how happy their lives are. When we look at, the research, they don't tend to be. So just because it works for savants does not mean for your kid faster is better. Like we said, cognitive results plateau at 8. So the kid who walks first in the antenatal class, because we've got research now that, we look and go, the kid who walks first is the one most likely to be hyperactive. So you don't actually want the one who walks first, and most of that's driven by genes, not your parenting. But the kid who sleeps through the night is really early. It's great for mum and dad, and it's great for a 7-year-old to sleep through the night. But a newborn baby in the first couple of years of life, their brain is growing so rapidly that waking up 3 or 4 times a night being topped up by formula or breast milk is going to be a huge advantage to that brain. And in fact, humans have only been thinking you sleep for 8 hours since the Industrial Revolution. It's just about working in factories. It's not. It never breaks. It never adds up. But it's just getting a consciousness going with the parents to understand, we have a culture that's heavily, we work in an area of education that's heavily embedded with those cultural beliefs. We sort of, we think a primary school is supposed to be learning. We've got respect for a secondary school teacher, but we think early childhood is, at best, it's a waste of time. You're just playing. At worst, it's picturing nappies and blowing noses. So teachers, parents will feel like they can tell the early childhood teacher what to do much more than they can the primary or the secondary school teacher. I think they've got theories on human development and stuff. So, and they just take it for granted that the earlier we do the 7-year-old stuff, the better off they're going to be. So I think it's about having those conversations like that and giving them the information, going, okay, we've got a cultural belief the earlier is the better, but kids who learn to read at 4, what we see from that is a way statistically increased chance of anxiety and depression when they're an adolescent. And that's because of the black and white thinking that you need to introduce in order to get literacy and numeracy. You can't be creative with literacy and numeracy. I often say to people, this is a T. It has to always make a T sound. You can't be creative and change it around. Literacy is a repetitive pattern. So that's wonderful for your frontal cortex. But if you start doing repetitive patterns when you're in your limbic system at 4 years old and you push away the creativity and the imaginary friends and the social skills and stuff so you can race towards literacy and numeracy, there's no advantage. And you're missing out on all that stuff that you could have been doing at the time. Because ultimately, intelligence is going to involve problem solving. And problem solving is going to need things like creativity, innovation, leadership. When we study kids and learn to, with the perfect child that's walking by the time they're 9 months old and, fully articulate by the time they're 2, but is reading by the time they're 4, they're usually a girl. They usually what we call A-type personality. They tend to get very black and white and rigid in their thinking. And they tend to develop a personality type, not all the time, but they tend to be that person that's set up for bad outcomes because they have to get an A+, and an A is not enough. And they've got to be so perfect that they need to meet their own standards. And I don't want to trash a whole bunch of people that learn to read at 4. I know it's a spectrum, but I'm just saying it just starts competition, it kills creativity, innovation. Well, the example I said in China, the Chinese government worked out that their kids might get 99% of the exam, but when they go to the workforce, the American kid gets the top job and the Chinese gets the 2 IC. Because you need to be the top job to be at interpersonal skills. You need to be able to read people. You need to be able to be creative, innovative, think on the spot. They're not the things that you get from black and white thinkers sitting down and doing tests at 4. So you make them they're in charge of accounts and 2 IC, but innovation, leadership. You study educational leadership right across the world. Study change. Who are the leaders that have brought about change? It's indisputable that that's why China's trying to reverse it, trying to bring it.
Hey, just if we double click onto that, Nathan, I think there's a really interesting piece there, and maybe some thinking for me as well. Like I think for center leaders and for services, and sorry, I have my notes up here, but center leaders and services looking to bring this kind of for advocate, for us to understand the impact of play, to advocate for it, maybe also like thinking about a structure that you can have within your service, whether it's starting with something simple, like maybe even a fact sheet or, presentation you can do to families, etc., which starts them on that journey of communicating the benefits of play and setting that context, I think would be very valuable. I think going into these conversations as well can be quite confronting. I know, for example, one of my services is in a heavily, it's an area in Australia which is dominated by pretty much a single cultural class, and the kind of like embedded belief in that service is reading by 4, homework. Early childhood centres should be providing homework to children from 4. School readiness starts at 4. And school readiness means they have a very strong view of what school readiness means, right? And of course, if you're in that kind of context and in that kind of culture, then advocating for play would be very, confronting, right? Because everyone around you is kind of talking about some very different viewpoint. And so, one of my recommendations would maybe even just to be starting, to start those conversations slowly, because you want to start shaping the context with your families and so on, and thinking about ways that you could do that. I know a fact sheet sounds so simple, but in a meeting that you're having with a family, being able to just point to specific points of evidence that we've been describing, adds credibility as well and helps you structure that conversation.
A lot of understanding that they're getting play as well as learning, not instead of learning. So don't think about being on the same side.
I think that's critical as well to be able to also demonstrate how play is learning and play is a medium for learning versus like play and the traditional conception of learning. Because I mean, as adults, when we think of learning, our memory really only starts from 7, 8, 9. Like that's when we start to have really vivid memories, right? And we see learning as instructional. Teacher telling us what to do, and so you can imagine the family's bias is going to be, oh well, that's what learning looks like because that's how I understand learning. That's how I was taught. They don't see all of the incredible things that our early childhood kind of gave to us.
Jumping through hoops.
And maybe that's also something, and maybe we can spend some time on this, Nathan, which is, one of the things we were talking about just before we jumped on was it's really easy to point to concrete things that are skills because, humans today, we have great language around that, right? It's like, my child can walk, my child can write their name, Like we culturally understand that's in the how we all think, milestones and so on. But there's no great language for dispositions that teaches, often can just point to and say, hey, like, or families can point to and say, oh, well, like, look at my child demonstrating resilience. And, that's not maybe socially valued. But, how can we, are there any kind of examples of things that you would be kind of telling to teachers to point to and start to create maybe some language around as you're communicating with families, so that we're empowering families also to see that learning more in the dispositional sense than the skills and knowledge sense?
And again, you want them to see it as well as you don't want to be a competition between play and learning, and their goals for their child and our goals for the child. So I think their stance would always be that we want to do the very best by your child. And so that's our job, that's our professional responsibility. And so we absolutely value those things, the self-discipline, the reading and the writing and the stuff you're doing at home. But we also know all of this stuff about the brain. We also know all the stuff about social, emotional, we know how they're going to manage their mental health for the rest of life. What's the point of them, having all the academic stuff if they fall over? People are going to be that big resilience. You can start talking about the economies and the changing jobs and AI, and it's not just now about being the accountant. It's about having the skills to understand numbers and to be creative with that. When you lose your job to AI, you can go in. It's not the accountancy skills that are going to sort you out. It's that resilience and bounce back and creativity. And if you want an innovative leader, you want someone with charm and charisma. Like, I just try and talk to them about, yes, those left brain things that the school measures and that we can grasp onto are important. They can see where you value them. But you really want, this is an opportunity for a child to have a right brain as well. We look at that research. We can give them this stuff as well as your literacy and numeracy by, and get them to understand what play is, how it's developing that, how them being in charge of their learning and doing stuff they really enjoy. If they set in place, the habits that, like, because they love the saxophone and they go and practice the saxophone every day, they set in place self-control, good routines and habit and commitment and discipline. But if we had got them to go to ballet, because that's what we decided, that's what Dad's always done, and that's what your grandfather done, they went to ballet, so you're going to ballet, and they hate it, so they don't practice in between. The skills that go behind what you're doing, the stuff that's going to make them successful and achieve all the things that the parent wants, are really in the right brain, and we need to develop those. So I think, again, it's about being as well as, not instead of. I always say to the parents, I totally get where you're coming from. That's where I would come from too. But if you know this information, you would see why I'm so passionate about the free play and the giving them a voice, and it's going to set them up to have a higher quality of life. Well, I'm just full of stories about all the different places I've been and when they've sacrificed that, because they don't listen to early childhood teachers. We've got less status than primary school teachers, and they don't tend to. Yeah, sorry, I went off on a veer there, but
no, I mean, we're
there's no point in getting them defensive and thinking you're doing a shit job because you're wasting your time and you're not doing what they want you to do. They have to see that you are doing what you want to do, but this is how you're doing it. You're integrated.
I think that's excellent. That's excellent, Nathan. And I'm just going to encourage, just before we move on, we have 15 minutes left. So if anyone has any questions, today we're focusing on play, connection, and culture, and how really, deepening our space around how ECE, the work that we're engaged in, shapes lifelong learning, and being able to also communicate and advocate for that as professionals in our sector. If you do have any questions, please feel free to throw that into the chat. We'll start looking at those in a couple of minutes from now. But Nathan, before we get there, maybe one of the last points that we wanted to cover today was really on early intervention and what that looks like in ECE. Because, when we talk about play and disposition, there is also, like you were sharing earlier, a way in which human beings normally kind of develop, and things that we should, not should, but there are things that we would see that would indicate normal versus non-normal, development. And, as professionals, we need to be, aware of that as well. So do you want to just start touching on that point?
Yep. I mean, early intervention is a crucial service, because the earlier we can see that there's a delay, might not even be a delay yet. if we get it nice and early, we're just seeing that it's not quite happening. Like let's take the obvious one of walking. Like a lot of parents might be concerned because their 12-month-old's not walking, but we know developmentally we're not going to even start going to be concerned until 15 months. So at 15 months, you're still not panicking, but you're going, oh, well, normally people have individual rates that they do things at. But usually most of the population has done that by 15 months. So I would have had the conversation when they're probably 13 months. I know this is all completely normal, that's fine, but they're 13 months and not walking, don't worry about it. They don't need to be walking until 15 months. You'd observe all the precursing behaviours to walking. If you've got a relationship and you're their teacher, you will know things like that. Do they crawl? Do they move around? How do they use their body? Do they use their body like typically developing like other children? Do they stay in one spot? It's not like walking just turns up as an isolated island by itself. It builds on top of all these other motor skills. And if I was their teacher, it's not like I'd be surprised at 15 months that they're not walking. You'd see all the behaviours leading up to it. And if I was concerned with delays with their older brothers or something about Brown walking, then I might be looking closer when he's 14 months. Where if we were someone else that wasn't at risk, I wouldn't, be concerned yet. But that family I am noticing. And so I'm doing things like spending one-on-one time with them, setting up obstacle courses and stuff, not picking them up straight away and getting them to come over, seeing where his motor skills can be extended in a natural play, even though it's still child-led and I'm following him and stuff. Then when we got to 15 months, and I thought, I'm a bit concerned now, there isn't any walking, maybe we should get some services in. When those services come, I can say, yes, I've done this, I've done that, he's got balance, we've had his ears checked, because we knew at 13 months he still wasn't walking, wasn't showing any signs yet, wasn't crawling very much, that it could be balanced. We made sure his ears got checked. We checked the family history and talked to the parents and found out, is there delays and motor skills? Does he have a jolly jumper? Does he spend a lot of time in a cot or an isolated environment? So you've got a full picture of when the developmental person comes along at 15 months. You can say, yeah, what you've ticked off, and they can now, go further and look on the specialist way.
Mm.
Yeah. So early intervention is embedded in what you're doing because it's embedded in the relationship. You notice things, and you've got if I'm the primary carer for that kid, you're noticing their physical, their motor skills, their fine motor skills, their social emotional skills, their cognitive skills. You know what the general stages are. And yes, there's individual variation, but like you said, there are developmental norms. So if kids are, 3 and don't seem to be able to have the concept of being someone else, they can only be completely 100% selfish. They've got no theory of mind to understand someone else's point of view. They have no tolerance, so go straight to screaming and hysterical response. Like that's already telling me that there's some delays, that there's some needs not being met. So when she gets to 5 and can't read, you've already noticed, because all those things are linked, you already noticed that the cognitive skills aren't there. She's not focusing her attention for very long periods of time. Like I say, she gets distressed easily. If we're looking after by roster and everyone's just babysitting a bit, then you don't get the same. But if you've got primary care, and I know these, 20 kids are my kids, and I'm focusing on their physical, their emotional, then you notice when stuff's missing. And yet the little boy might not be interested in the alphabet yet, and that you put that down to normal variation. But when a kid gets to 16 months and can't walk, then there's a delay. When the kids get to 3 years old and have no, or 3.5, 4, and have no theory of mind, they can't share, they're constantly upset. There's lots of indicators to recognise global delay, or where to get early intervention services in. So the one that they're concerned about is literacy. Well, the people that are pushing literacy early, they're going, we should. You would see things as a teacher. I would notice that there's stuff wrong with literacy and numeracy if they weren't able to use any symbols. There was no engaging with someone. They went blank and didn't engage with media. When you're playing with them and they've got a J on the front of their sweatshirt, do they know that stands for Jesse? I feel like I'm saying the obvious stuff, but when you've got the relationships with the kids, early intervention is quite natural. You can see it. You got your peers there. It's not like when you're a parent and it's just down to your judgment until you get help. Parents don't notice stuff. They try to be so positive and helpful I've been in lots of situations where I've got to their house and I've basically thought, oh my God, how could you not notice that? Because from an outside point of view, the kid was really severely. So I can understand parents by themselves might not notice things. But as an early childhood teacher, you're in a centre, and you've got colleagues and stuff as well. And you will notice those things and they will notice those things. So you don't need formalised literacy program to do early intervention. If you've got the relationship, you'll see when they need an intervention early on. The kids that either have developmental needs or, like you mentioned earlier, a lot of them come from trauma, and you will see a cluster of those things. The kids that can't control themselves and are having hissy fit and throwing things and stuff are usually the kids that come from trauma. You could see that delay right from the start, and their inability to settle down, their inability to attach to someone. So right from the start, you start to put in place those needs. I know I've got one of those families coming in. I'm not going to wait until they're 5 and can't read. I'm going to go, right, okay, these kids come from, a hardcore family. They're one of the roughest families in wherever you are. God knows how long they're going to be at the service, because they're pretty transient. They might leave after 3 years. But the one thing that we can do for this kid that comes from that hardcore family or comes from foster care is give him one person that mainly cares for him for the whole time he's here. We can't necessarily do that for everybody else, but we're going to prioritise it for them because they are the vulnerable learner. They're the ones that are, people go, oh, you can't do that for everyone. You don't have to do it for everyone, because not everyone's going to be in foster care and going to be someone that needs an early intervention and needs that. Other kids are going to be fine. They'll sail through. But you recognise those kids straight away, and you put in place the needs that they have at the time. So I wouldn't wait to 5 to do literacy. I'd look at 1 and do dyadic relationship. Do they have one safe, anchored, relationship that they can anchor themselves in? So I can give them that at the centre. I can not change the teacher every year.
It's so beautiful.
So when they've got domestic violence, we do yell, but shut up. Time to shut up and play with the iPad, and that sort of low quality parenting. Their dispositions, that they don't want to risk take because I'll get in trouble. So as a teacher, again, doing an early intervention, I'm going to deliberately set up and focus on risk taking for that child, to get them to see, how much better they can be, how much they can see themselves. What we call Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. So to me, it's just relationship, and it's not a one or the other. People go, if you don't do early literacy and formal instruction, you won't get early intervention. But that's bullshit. You do get early intervention. You see it, their stages of development, their cognitive development, they're right across the board. Yes, you can have both. You can do like teacher-led instruction stuff and then do play-based in the afternoon. But you're not going to get the genius play ones, because the kids are geniuses. They work out the important stuff you really value and comes up in the report, and that you spend all your time marking is what's done in the morning. So the afternoon is just not the important stuff. So you're teaching free play in the afternoon, but you're not really teaching the essential things you're going to get from free play. That autonomy in your learning, because they think the teacher's in charge. It's not the afternoon, not. Yeah.
It's so interesting, actually, because so much of this comes back to our viewpoint of ourselves and our role in this child's life. And I think so much of it is a self-examination as well. I love that about early childhood teaching, actually, in the early years, because it's so fundamental that it requires us to, I think the greatest early childhood educators are those who can look at themselves and go, what's at the source of my behavior with this child that's having me, there's this interesting thing. I'll just bring up our foster child again. So recently Xavier said to me, hey, coffee, because we have a coffee machine at home, coffee. And Mel's mum, he says, mum, coffee. And then he was essentially inviting her to make a coffee, and then I said, okay, Xavier, let's do this. Right. So, we take up the thing. I say, okay, like press the button. He's like trying, 5 times to press the cappuccino button, presses the cappuccino button. Then, okay, Xavier, so next thing is, we press the grind. But, in my view, I'm like, this child is capable of doing this. He's 2 years old. It doesn't even matter what his age is, but it's an examination of self. And I remember like the biases that I had around, okay, is he capable? He's 2. He's only structuring three-word sentences at the moment, like not only. He does have, he has some sort of, he has delay at the moment as a function of trauma. But, it was interesting to see and re-examine my own viewpoint of what a child is capable of, what this human's capable of. And in doing so, I think now every morning it's like coffee. And like, it's an invitation for him to participate in this exercise, right?
Yeah, it's something he's successful at, and he's repeating the experience, and repetition's so good for the brain.
Yeah. But it's interesting actually, because like as you're going through this whole conversation today, what was coming up in my mind was actually less so about how we communicate with families, but more so how we internalize who we are for children, who we are for families, right? And building a sense of, this is actually our role in the world, in society, for these families, for these children, right? And I think when that's present, all of this, in my view, starts to flow.
Absolutely.
And
I think we have to examine that a bit more than other parts of the sector, primary school and secondary school, because their role is not challenged by the research. They are the facilitator up the front that's a knower, they're getting ready for the test and stuff. We are about teaching people how to think, and about how they're going to feel for the rest of their life. So, like I said with the coffee machine, it's not about the outcome of doing the coffee. It's that he got the idea, someone thinks what I said was a good idea. If he's come from foster care, he's probably not been told lots that he's got good ideas. Those are the dispositions that we need to develop. I think for early childhood teachers, it's about how you are in relationship with that kid. Without examining it, we can automatically put ourselves above that kid. Developmentally, we know way more than they do. They're I'm the knower and they're the not knower. I need to teach them. We have those inherent views. They're just a low quality relationship. I mean, it sounds a bit extreme, but everything we say about children, their brains are smaller, they're developmentally behind us. Of course, I've got to be in charge. That's everything we used to say about women. Of course, men have to be in charge of women. They've got smaller brains than men do. They're weak emotionally. Can't get it together because they're so emotional. And it was bullshit. It was they were things imposed in our minds on women. That were just based on our perception of where women were at. And we actually did the same thing to black people. Had made up all this bogus science and said that they're closer to apes and stuff. All bullshit. But we constructed a story that said, no, that's what they are. And I think we do that with children if we don't examine. We construct a story that you're the knower, that you have to tell them. The job of a teacher is for you to instruct them, to tell them how to be. And it's really not. It's you're having a relationship with that child. It's how you have the relationship that that makes that informs how that child feels and what they think of themselves. I was at a school recently here in Milton. I went to talk because they invited me to. It's my hometown, so I went to talk to the kids. And the teachers want the normal sort of that stuff, tell the kids about the brain and stuff. I know from understanding dispositions, I was able to do powerful stuff like talk about the brain for a bit, and then I said, okay, who's got a bad brain or a broken brain? Who's got a brain that's not good? To see how many other people put their hands up. So they put, and you can see the teacher thought that some of them had bad brains. So some of the kids put their hand up, and I went, "Oh no, well, I think you're mistaken because there's no such thing as a bad brain." And I was like, someone's giving you the wrong idea because brains are amazing. You just got to work out how to drive it, but no one's got a bad brain. So that's not what the teachers would want me to teach them. They want me to teach them the hippocampus and the amygdala. But in that age group under 7, for the kid that's going forward thinking my brain's broken, my brain's not good, my brain's a bad brain, that's going to be really detrimental to all of us learning. He thinks he's something. So having an expert come in and address that and say, actually, all brains are good brains. Those are the fundamental thing. So that's what I mean by your relationship. I noticed that I did things like, I'm not just blowing my own trumpet, I don't go into schools all the time, but I found it difficult to stay standing above the kids all the time. So they're welcoming me, and I've ended up down on the floor with the kids. The other teachers couldn't get down on the floor, but that's fine. They didn't need to get down on the floor. But I just noticed a different framework that we come from. I was there meeting all these other souls that come from the same hometown that I do, and I could meet, some of them will just be boring and nothing I'll never see again, but I can usually meet amazing little souls that are really cool people, and I'm just seeing them as a person, not as a child that knows as they're told, and the neurodiverse children really respond to that. So because I recognise seeing them as a full person and not a half person that needs to be told what to do. So yeah, sorry, I went
Yeah.
off there, but I just wanted to,
No,
I
that's
think the
great.
role of a child is to have a relationship and have a really high quality relationship, and you try and brainwash that kid into thinking he is fucking amazing. And you're not like you telling him that and her that, but in the way that you respond to them, and the way that you see them, and the way that you encase things. You know, you do that as a grandparent. Like you did, like you sort of like my grandchild would never do anything wrong. So if she broke the window to your house, she must have been practicing to be a firewoman. She'll have a good intentions. Like I'm not, I'm joking, but that's kind of what you do as an early child teacher. You get the child to love themselves, to see themselves as competent, and that follows all those dispositions that are going to make them successful, to be inquisitive and curious and social and positive and confident and all the things that make life enjoyable.
Now, Nathan, we're going to go into Q&A.
Yeah, Tom, sorry.
Now, I'm also conscious we're a couple of minutes.
Stuff on my thing.
Yeah, I'm looking at my notes as well. I think we've done a good job, mate.
Yeah.
Now, just before we go into Q&A, I want to also share that we have an incredible session coming up for those of us who are interested in understanding Reggio and the theory behind Reggio, being hosted by Karina Waldorf from Mother Duck. So that's on 2nd of April at 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. So that's 1 p.m. for our New Zealanders. And I'm sorry, I can't convert it to every time zone, but if you click on that link, you'll be able to register into that session. And I'm sure it's going to be an incredible session with Karina. Now, we have one really great question, though, that I would love to double click onto, Nathan, which is, I'll just pull it up. So the question is, how do we get old school staff, and I guess, what that means, old school staff, to get on board with free play? So Angela's saying here that I have staff that are focused on teaching the ABC or letter of the week, as well as things like doing Easter templates. How do we get them over the line? So Nathan, maybe keen to get your thoughts on that.
I think it's again, what is that saying? You attract more flies with honey than vinegar. You have to get those. You have to acknowledge what those old school people are doing. You have to acknowledge that important contribution. It is good that someone's doing that. So you've got to introduce the information as well as, not instead of. You're not dissing them because they're not doing it your way. You're going, I would. So I love that stuff. I love your literacy program. The word of the day and stuff. The kids are really buzzing on that, and that's great. Because I see the kids talking about it at playtime, and they're showing a real enjoyment in their reading. And so I think that's what you're really achieving. That's amazing. Because I could give a fuck what their reading level is at this stage, but the fact that they are enjoying it and buzzing about it in the playground, you are fostering a love of reading, and that will stay with them for the rest of their life. So whatever it is you're doing in your reading of the day, word of the day program, keep doing it in the way that you're doing it. Because if you look at all the science and the research and how brains work, it's not just the what they're learning and that the word of the day. It's how they're learning. It's going to stay with them for a lifetime. And whatever you're doing, lady, it's working. So even if it's not, big, someone would have been nice about her. It's but I've got to acknowledge what she's doing and extend her. And a good way to do that is usually by telling them they're doing it already. People like to think they already knew stuff. So she goes, yeah, that's right. And they're learning to enjoy learning. Yeah, she'll add it on. But she was really just focused on the word of the day. But now she's extended that and they're learning to enjoy learning. So yeah, I'll extend them that way. Attract more flies with honey. Be nice and praise what they've done and extend on that. And say, did you know this? I often use that as an expression. Did you know this? Like, you lay it down. You don't ram it down their throats. No, you're supposed to. Just get people defensive straight away. So going, and I've said it several times today where you go, oh yeah, I used to be like that. I used to think this when I told a story about, take my child to childcare centre and stuff. You can put your own self in there and say it was all right to be wrong. And I've developed it on. It just creates a strong starting point.
Yeah, nice. Showing that you've been on the journey of change yourself is so empowering as well. Because I think there's a lot of.
So I feel so blessed that I just got a job at a university where I had to be immersed in the research, just as my kids were. The eldest one missed out a bit because but the next two, got the benefits of that. Like I said at the start, I was amazed to find that stuff and that no one was doing it. I just assumed that we would be doing that then. I just assumed we were research based. So I become quite, I see my son, and I was just quite militant. I was like, mate, I wouldn't even bother reading if I was you. It's just a waste of time. Just wait until you're 7. and then you'll learn it in like 6 weeks. Be easy as. And it, and it's like, no, the teacher told me it underpins the whole curriculum, especially in reading. I said, you can do it if you want, but it does, honestly, it don't really matter. You'll catch up when you're 7. You know, by the time you're 8, you'll have the same reading. And because that does help, you know, he I think he had a cruisier time. He's got a better attitude towards learning and stuff now, because I didn't let him get all stressed out, because he's a boy, he's not the firstborn. He's never going to learn till he was 7. I didn't want him to get to 7 and think he's a bit dumb and a bit slow, because he's behind all the rest of it. So I just reinforced those messages all the time. Teachers hated me, but I protected his identity as an intelligent person. Whereas I've just seen too many boys not the firstborn that couldn't do reading or spelling, or were a bit delayed. But I remember being starting school at 5 in a big school. And when I learned to spell Milton, my hometown, I'd only been at school for like 3 weeks. I didn't go to any early childhood education. Parents are like pissheads, you know. So I was really impressed that I'd learned. No one read me a story going to bed or anything. So when I learned to write Milton, I thought, wow, I've only been here 3 weeks, I can spell Milton. This spelling thing was new to me. And I raced up to the teacher and went, I can spell Milton. And the teacher said, you should have been able to spell that when you started the day you started school. What did your parents do today? And I remember, and I remember going from, oh, I'm really clever, to, I'm dumb. I'm supposed to be able to do that already. And I was starting to do it. And just the sheer drop. And I had opposite experience when I then moved schools. I went to a country school, and a new principal come, years later. And I said, well, you're supposed to write a school play and direct it and do, skip for the end of the year and stuff. And he was like, no one listens to me. Everyone listens to you. You're school president. They invited me as school president. He said, why would I direct when you could do it? I thought, I can't do that. I'm a kid. And then he was like, you should write the plays, because, you're way funnier than I am. And he would have me in the principal's office, and he would talk to me like an adult. And I thought, I can't write a play. I'm only a kid. And I can't direct a play. I'm only a kid. I can't put on a whole concert and stuff. But I did all of that when I was 8. And I remember the profound impact it had on me when I realized, because I did not know I could do all those things. And I thought, wow, I am way more than I know I am. And that is the most powerful lesson I could ever get. Not literacy, not numeracy. Knowing, shit, even when I think I can't do stuff, I should give it a go, because fuck, there's lots going on in here, and I can do way more than I knew. That's a disposition. That's profound change. Just the contrast.
Nathan, we've been getting a lot of love in the Q&A. Sector's lucky to have you. Love you, Nathan. I'll take any opportunity to listen to you. Just to give you some positive vibes, just right back as well. And Michelle's also saying, Nathan, particularly interested in your point about how highly focused learning in one area, like literacy and maths, can have a detriment to various other areas. Thank you. So a lot of love in the chat. And just to everyone here, thank you so much for your time today. But Nathan, I think that's all the time we have, mate. We're 10 minutes over.
I love it. I think we did well. It's a big area.
I think we did great.
You look at all the human development research and the history of education and how culture informs our core decisions and stuff. It's a lot for people to take on, but keep going. Champion play. Play is the answer. It's not just because we're early childhood teachers. It is the answer to life. It's the answer to mental health. It's the answer to problem solving. Play is the way.
Play is the answer. I think that's a takeaway from today.
Yeah.
Play is the answer. Nathan, we tried to solve all of neuroscience within 3 hours over the last 3 months. I think we've done a pretty good job of that. But I just want to say a big thank you for joining us over the last couple of months, and we can't wait to have you on soon as well, and talk to the rest of the sector about some of the other exciting things we're working on. But
cool. I love what you do. Great.
Likewise, mate, and thank you so much for your time. Thank you everyone here for joining, for participating, for being part of a conversation that uplifts our sector, our own identity of who we are, and the impact that we're going to have on the children that we're the custodians of. So thank you so much for being part of it, and can't wait to see you at either the Regio webinar or future webinars that we do. But in the meantime, thank you everyone for attending.
Yeah, thanks everybody.